Yeah, welcome. This is Last Call Reacts, where I hit you with a video once a week about something going on in the news. And there is a lot going on in the news lately, of course, but I'm going to shine some light on something that I guess you want to say the mainstream news is not necessarily reporting too much. There's a couple things in the paper on some online magazines and articles about this, but not really, of course, with all the events of the last couple of weeks happening. This is not getting the play that it should. And of course, the controversial stand. So what we're talking about today is the passing of, we will say, true civil rights leader, Assata Shakur. Now, you may have seen rumblings around this on the interwebs and whatnot, but let me play a couple things here, and then I'll read a little bit about it, of who she is. I know you kind of know who she is, but some more detail about that also. Here we go.
Liberation. So how did Assata go from activist to FBI's most wanted? This is what you didn't know about Assata Shakur. There is no evidence of the birth of Assata Shakur, at least none that can be confirmed by the FBI. The wanted poster released by the Federal Bureau of Investigation lists Shakur's birthday as July 16, 1947. But in parentheses, it states, not substantiated by birth records. The FBI also notes that Shakur used August 19, 1952 as her birthday. However, she was born as Joanne Deborah Bryan, what she called
Fair Use Act. This is from Hype Media News, reporting on this as well. Fair use, fair use.
Her slave name, in Jamaica, Queens, New York, where she grew up moving back and forth between her mom, aunt, and grandparents in Wilmington, North Carolina. Growing up in the Jim Crow era, Shakur's grandparents, Lola and Frank Hill, who owned a local dance hall, instilled in her a sense of dignity, especially regards to white people. They would tell her things like, "You're as good as anyone else. Don't let anyone tell you that they're better than you." And when it came to white people, she was forbidden from calling them ma'am or sir, looking down while speaking to them, or any other subservient gestures. In her autobiography, she writes, "I was told to hold my head up high or risk having my grandparents knock it off my shoulders." Although Shakur experienced racism earlier in life, she wouldn't begin to radicalize into her late teen years. At 17 years old, Shakur dropped out of school and moved out on her own. She lived with strangers for a while until her aunt Evelyn, who later became her lawyer, took her in and helped her get her GED. She would go on to attend Bureau of Manhattan Community College and later City College of New York. She made friends with many of the African students on campus. Then one day in 1964, a discussion on the roots of the Vietnam War changed her life. "I never forgot that day. We're taught at such an early age to be against communists, yet most of us don't have the faintest idea what communism is. Only a fool lets somebody else tell him who his enemy is." She became active in different organizations like the Garveyites in the Republic of New Africa. And in the late 1960s, Assata would join one of the most prominent political organizations, the Black Panther Party. Though brief, her time with the Black Panthers would mark a life-changing turn of events in her political career. She had always revered the message of the Black Panther Party, especially because they made it really clear who the enemy was. Not the white people, but the capitalistic, imperialistic oppressors. Shakur has said that the party not being open to criticism.
Very different to the goals of these white supremacist groups that fight for supremacy, nationalism, and separatism. This is very different when people try to compare the two things, and we gotta not let the media do that. That these are different times here. When you have people like Charlie Kirk, and I hope this is the last week I mentioned this idiot's name, mentioned that civil rights wasn't good for black people, this, that, and they're honoring him with bills and statutes about things that they're trying to rewrite what he stood for exactly. Back in the 60s here, with what Assata Shakur was doing, was way more important work, not just in the course of black people, dare I say colored people, but even fighting for the soul of America is what made this movement so popular. Anyway, a few more minutes of this.
Criticism led to her exit from the organization. In her autobiography, she writes, "Constructive criticism and self-criticism are extremely important for any revolutionary organization. Without them, people tend to drown in their own mistakes, not learning from them." Government infiltration, namely COINTELPRO, among other factors, led to the demise of the Black Panther Party, but not before its most prominent members had turned against each other, been killed, falsely imprisoned, or demonetized in the media. These events gave way to the Black Liberation Army, a group that the FBI named Shakur the heart of. BLA members operated under the belief that only through covert means, including but not limited to violent acts, could the movement be continued. This underground Black Party spinoff built its tactics around revolutionary violence with the goal to take up arms for the liberation of Black people in the United States. Acting as her own co-counsel in a 1976 trial for murder, Assata claimed in her opening statement, "The Black Liberation Army is not an organization. It goes beyond that. It is a concept, a people's movement, an idea. The idea of a Black Liberation Army emerged from conditions in Black communities, conditions of poverty, indecent housing, massive unemployment, poor medical care, and inferior education," she continued. The concept of the BLA arose because of its political, social.
No part of that sounds like what anybody is fighting for today on a hate side. When you look at these things here written in black and white, or when they're said, they sound like very reasonable topics for an organization to be advocates of, especially for people who weren't considered citizens for the last 100 years and enslaved hundreds of years prior to those Jim Crow laws. Let's continue.
And economic oppression of Black people in this country. And where there is oppression, there will be resistance. From 1971 to 1973, Shakur was alleged to have committed a series of heinous crimes: 2 bank robberies in New York, the kidnap of a drug dealer, armed robbery, and the attempted murder of a policeman in an ambush. In 1972, the FBI issued a warrant for her arrest in connection with these crimes allegedly committed by the BLA. It was clear that the Black Liberation Army was a target for the FBI, local police agencies, and they were being pinned with every violent crime in the area. Assata would later either be acquitted for every charge or the case was dismissed. Then came the events of May 2nd, 1973, the fatal Jersey Turnpike shootout. There are different accounts of what happened that night, but what we do know is that Assata and her political associates, Zaid Malik Shakur and Sindada Akoli, were stopped by State Trooper James Harper, backed up by Trooper Weiner Forster for driving with a broken taillight. Shots were fired and Zaid Shakur and Weiner Forster were killed. After fleeing the scene, Assata, wounded with 2 gunshots to the arm and the back, surrendered to the police, and Akoli was captured after a 36-hour manhunt. Only the survivors know what really happened that night, and Assata refuses to share details even to this day. But in 1977, upon being found guilty, Assata maintains that the jury convicted a woman with her hands up. The trial was considered by many to be a miscarriage of justice, beginning with the jury selection. Transcripts show that at least 2 of the juries expressed prejudice before the start of the trial. 5 out of the 15 jurors selected, all white, were close friends or relatives to New Jersey state troopers.
So, if you don't know your history, when they used to lynch Black people, when they used to terrorize Black people, and it was legal back then, you think about Emmett Till, anything like this, just very much like today when crimes are committed, particularly against Black people, there's no rush to arrest or gather up. Even if we look back at something, I call it simple, but the Cincinnati brawl, where the media, where did that go, by the way? I did 2 videos on that, of how the perception was, how even the mayor caught shit for saying it's not what you think. You people in the media, you got to control your narrative because it's dangerous. In the next few days of that, we find out old white man dropped the N-bomb. Not only that, tried to pimp smack not a guy that was associated with the kerfuffle, but smacked an onlooker, which caused outright barrage of beatings towards this guy, which I would say rightful. Anyway, going back, we know miscarriages of justice has happened since America called justice so-called justice, right? We know they got an all-white jury. We know that for the most part, they got racist judges, people in the court, witnesses to back up these terrible stories that they put against Black people as well, just to lock them up, and they were allowed to do this. So part of this, knowing that you're not getting a fair trial, means you got to make alternate plans.
A major key in Assata's defense was medical testimony proving that during the confrontation, she was shot with her hands up, sustaining paralyzing wounds that would make her unable to fire a weapon in the manner that Trooper Harper had testified. Harper's testimony conflicted
Hands
throughout
up.
the trial, and he testified to lying in his official report on the incident as well as in his grand jury testimony. And though there were no forensic evidence proving that Assata ever touched a gun that night, the jury found her guilty on all 8 counts. She was sentenced to life plus 30 years. Shakur spent years in jail before her conviction under conditions that most would consider to be deplorable. In her autobiography, she tells of being embarrassed and even tortured by police in the hospital after the incident. She was chained to her hospital bed and interrogated while gravely injured. She was even held in an all-male prison in solitary confinement for over 20 months and under 24-hour surveillance. She was beaten and given less than adequate medical care, even when she became pregnant with her only daughter, Kakuya. When the prison first found out she was pregnant, a doctor not only lied about her diagnosis multiple times, but he also refused to provide Shakur with any support besides an abortion. So in 1979, Assata Shakur had decided that it was time to go. On November 2nd, she escaped from the Clinton Correctional Facility for Women. It is said that a group of members of the Black Liberation Army helped Shakur escape by posing as visitors to the prison. Holding 2 correctional officers hostage at gunpoint, they stole a prison van to get off the facility grounds, leaving the hostages in the parking lot before switching cars and fleeing the scene. Shakur refuses to go into detail about her escape in solitary with those incarcerated due to their involvement. After breaking out of prison, Assata went on the run and remained underground for 5 years until fleeing to Cuba and receiving political asylum in 1984. To this day, Shakur remains in Cuba with the FBI classifying her as a domestic.
All right, so we're going to stop there for a minute, bring it back to today's current events. I'm just going to read you a little bit of one of these articles I have up here. Holy schmoly with the tabs, not that one. This one. So we see, according to the short announcement, we know her government name, but we are definitely going to call her Assata Shakur. And of course, you know her for being Tupac's godmother as well. When we tell you, unfortunately, this is the stuff that's not taught in school. And we're not talking about anything, the shooting of the guards, but the conditions that created this sort of stuff, the conditions that you knew you weren't going to get a fair trial on if you went through their so-called justice system. So after this, we know that she would be granted political asylum in Cuba by the one and only Fidel Castro. Now, a lot of people feel different ways about Castro, particularly white Cubans. And yes, when I say white Cubans, there are a lot of so-called black Cubans as well, or Afro-Latinos, whatever you want to call them. White Cubans didn't like Fidel Castro because what did he do when he got into power? He attempted to redistribute the land and the wealth so that everybody could benefit from it. This was the communist, not turn into a dictator, but this was the communist way. The communist way who saw the errors of America and believed through everything, all the outlets, all the outreach, all the activism that came out of the 60s. And I say, black people were fighting. This gave birth to the Brown movement, the Appalachian movement, the feminist movement, everything as well, how necessary this was. Let's not make any mistake. Black Panthers, anybody that promoted or advocated for civil rights, they were fighting for the soul of America. Today's supremacists fight to separate, destroy, and to be superior, a superior race. You could date that way back before anything else. Believe this guy, Charlie Kirk, he would believe in eugenics, even spat a few things supporting that rhetoric. But today, we're here to celebrate the life of Assata Shakur. a real political activist. I think I cut my voice out there, but that was basically all I wanted to say. Follow up, I do a live at 9 p.m. on Friday nights. That's actually tonight. So you could do me a favor, man. You could tap in. We'll probably be talking about this and a couple other things. Glad to have you in here. Check out some other names. Rest in Power, Assata Shakur, anybody else who was down with the movement, who got bamboozled, sidetracked, who got an unfair trial. And quite frankly, when the party dissipated, when they dismantled it from the COINTELPRO, we don't even know what happened to a lot of those guys who put their lives on the line. Most tragic, maybe Huey P. Newton, who was shot in his own neighborhood by somebody trying to make a name. R.I.P. And I mean rest in power. And let's remember the greatness that we come from and continue that legacy of Black resistance and excellence. Peace.